ho, psycho, psycho. Oh, ho, Niccolo, psycho. Oh, ho, psycho, psycho. I just wanna sing your name. Psycho, 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 psycho. Ho, ho, psycho, Nicola. Psycho, psycho. I just want to sing your name.
Beginning with the First World War, an alliance of the Departments of Justice, Labor, and Immigration initiated a campaign of repression. Agents broke into the homes of suspected radicals, arrested them, and seized their possessions. Many were deported. Most of the victims were foreigners, usually Russians, Italians, and Jews. Two men stand out as targets of the anti-radical campaign. They were Italian-born, residents of Boston for many years, respectable workers and dedicated anarchists. They were attempting to dispose of some anarchist leaflets when they were arrested on a charge of armed robbery and murder. Their names were Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti.
Oh, Psycho Vanzetti. Oh, Psycho Vanzetti. Psycho, Psycho Vanzetti. I just want to sing your name.
The state's evidence was flimsy, and the witnesses for the prosecution gave confused and contradictory testimony. Sacco and Vanzetti proclaimed their innocence, but they were convicted and sentenced to death. Appeal after appeal was denied. The case became an international cause. Marches and defense efforts were organized worldwide. But on August 23, 1927, the state of Massachusetts, which had condemned Sacco and Vanzetti as violent and dangerous men, mobilized 500 heavily armed policemen to suppress protests and electrocuted the two Boston anarchists.
Do you think this was the right punishment for them? Please write that down in your notes and kind of think about it. But this is ultimately going to lead to these ideas of highlighted social class struggles. If they would have been super, super, super wealthy, would have this happened? Maybe if they were a different nationality, etc. The 1920s with the Ku Klux Klan had a really significant role in social and political problems. Political meaning local and state politics. KKK is going to be laced in them. Actually, believe it or not, in the election where we're going to see many Ku Klux Klan leaders like supporting certain people, especially during this time frame. For example, a lot of Democrats during this time frame were supported by KKK members, and they're going to really be promoted by this group that people don't necessarily believe is bad. So we get the John Scopes monkey trial, is what they're going to call it. This is going to happen in Dayton, Tennessee. Okay, so basically what's going to happen here is we're going to see the Scopes monkey trial. This was supposed to pull up or basically show what's happening in religion. So this man, okay, he was 27 years old, I do believe. And he was involved. His name is John Scopes, and he was arrested for teaching evolution in a biology class. Now, in 1925, it was a crime to teach evolution underneath what was called the Butler Law. So technically, he was following what he was supposed to be doing. But anyway, it was basically just as publicized. It was supposed to bring a lot of attention to Dayton, Tennessee, but it ended up basically indeed becoming a really huge tension of cultural beliefs. We're going to have the ACLU is going to provide defense. Clarence Darrow is going to be the defense attorney for John Scopes. The trial is going to show a lot of religious and conservative nature in America. It's also going to display the vast differences between big cities and small towns. And it's really going to create that divide even more. People were scared of the modern day technologies and started resorting back to this more religious aspect because they were afraid with too much technology and modernism, you're going to create a society that doesn't have any morals or values. But we were basically wanting to be a modern society, but things like this were happening. So here's a little clip from that.
The 1920s seemed both highly conservative and radically modern, with conservative presidents like Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, and conservative social measures like prohibition. In the 1920s, The KKK emerged as a major political and commercial force, gaining control of several state legislatures.
Our unity is threatened with the hordes of immigrants who have caught each other under our flag. They bring foreign ideas and ideals into our land.
The media celebrated a less conservative side as well. Gangsters, jazz age flappers, and a Hollywood movie culture that seemed both glamorous and dangerously immoral. The theory of evolution brought the conflict between tradition and modernity to a focus. In 1925, Tennessee passed a law restricting the teaching of evolution in public schools. The American Civil Liberties Union regarded such laws as unconstitutional infringements of free speech, and it had publicly offered to defend anyone who willingly broke the Tennessee law. John Thomas Scopes was a football coach and a math teacher who sometimes taught biology in the small East Tennessee town of Dayton. One day, a group of local businessmen approached him about making a test case. They reviewed a textbook then in use in the Dayton schools, which taught evolution in a way that violated the Tennessee law. Scopes agreed, and the trial became a national obsession. The first, but not the last, trial of the century. It brought together two of the most famous figures in American politics and law, William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. Darrow stood, in a general way, for modernity and skepticism. He defended Scopes. Bryan stood, in a general way, for tradition and faith. He defended Tennessee's law. The two men's presence at the trial helped set off a media circus. It drew the attention of newspapers, magazines, ministers, politicians, philosophers, radio broadcasters, and average citizens. Your task is to figure out how the Scopes trial was more than a simple debate between evolutionists and creationists.
So, to be honest, was it really worth what it was fighting for, etc.? This is the last slide I'm going to do, the Harlem Renaissance. So this was a cultural shift in the 1920s, 1930s. We're going to get that Great Migration I told you about earlier, but that Harlem Renaissance is going to be African-American based cultural, social, artistic movements that's going to take place towards the end of World War I.